Question 1. Compliance review shows that a long-standing client who has consistently provided satisfactory documentation for previous transactions is now requesting an immediate transfer of a significant sum of money to an overseas jurisdiction with a known high risk for money laundering. The client has provided a brief, uncorroborated explanation for the transfer, stating it is for a business opportunity. The junior associate handling the account is aware of the firm's anti-money laundering (AML) obligations, but is concerned about upsetting the client and delaying the transaction. What is the most appropriate course of action for the junior associate? Option A. Proceed with the transfer as requested, assuming the client's long-standing relationship and previous satisfactory documentation mitigate any current risk. Option B. Conduct a quick internal check of publicly available information on the destination country, and then proceed if no immediate red flags are apparent. Option C. Immediately escalate the request to the firm's compliance department for further review and guidance, providing all relevant details of the client's request and the transaction. Option D. Inform the client that the firm cannot proceed with the transfer due to the overseas jurisdiction and the vague explanation, without consulting compliance. Correct answer is C. Immediately escalate the request to the firm's compliance department for further review and guidance, providing all relevant details of the client's request and the transaction. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's explicit instructions and the firm's regulatory obligations. The firm must navigate the potential for reputational damage and client dissatisfaction if it refuses the instruction, while simultaneously upholding its duty to comply with anti-money laundering (AML) regulations. The complexity arises from determining the appropriate level of due diligence and the threshold for escalating concerns without prematurely alienating a client or breaching confidentiality. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach demonstrates best professional practice by prioritizing regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. It acknowledges the client's request but immediately triggers a review process aligned with AML regulations. This involves assessing the nature of the transaction, the client's risk profile, and the source of funds. Escalating the matter to the firm's compliance department ensures that a qualified team, familiar with the specific regulatory framework, e.g., the Proceeds of Crime Act 2002 and the Money Laundering Regulations 2017 in the UK, can conduct a thorough investigation. This approach upholds the firm's legal and ethical duties, protects against potential involvement in illicit activities, and ensures that any decision is made based on a comprehensive understanding of the risks and regulatory requirements. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves directly executing the client's instruction without further inquiry. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It bypasses the mandatory due diligence procedures required by AML legislation, exposing the firm to severe penalties, including fines and reputational damage. Ethically, it represents a dereliction of duty to prevent financial crime. Another incorrect approach is to immediately refuse the client's request without any investigation or consultation with the compliance department. While caution is necessary, an outright refusal without understanding the context or potential legitimacy of the transaction can be unprofessional and may lead to unnecessary client friction. It fails to explore whether the transaction, with appropriate enhanced due diligence, could be permissible. A third incorrect approach is to conduct a superficial review internally without involving the dedicated compliance function. This approach risks overlooking critical red flags or misinterpreting regulatory requirements, as internal staff may lack the specialized knowledge and authority of the compliance department to handle complex AML issues. This can lead to a false sense of security, while still exposing the firm to regulatory breaches. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should adopt a structured decision-making process. First, identify the core issue, a client request that potentially conflicts with regulatory obligations. Second, consult the relevant regulatory framework and internal policies to understand the specific requirements and thresholds for action. Third, engage the compliance department as the designated authority for assessing and managing regulatory risks. Fourth, gather all necessary information to conduct a thorough risk assessment. Finally, act based on the informed advice of the compliance department, balancing client relationships with unwavering adherence to legal and ethical standards. Question 2. Assessment of the most effective strategy for integrating data security and privacy requirements into a new NTT data client project, given a tight delivery deadline and the sensitive nature of the client's data. Option A. Rely on the organization's standard, generic security protocols, assuming they are adequate for this project without specific validation. Option B. Proactively engage the cybersecurity team from the project's inception to embed security by design principles and conduct necessary risk assessments. Option C. Prioritize meeting the project deadline by deferring detailed security implementation until after the initial launch, with plans for a quick retrofit. Option D. Proceed with development as planned and address security and privacy concerns in a subsequent phase after the initial delivery. The correct answer is B. Proactively engage the cybersecurity team from the project's inception to embed security by design principles and conduct necessary risk assessments. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between delivering a project on time and ensuring robust data security and privacy, especially when dealing with sensitive client information. Pressure to meet deadlines can tempt teams to bypass or shortcut critical security protocols, leading to potential breaches and regulatory noncompliance. Careful judgment is required to balance project velocity with the non-negotiable imperative of data protection. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach, which involves proactively engaging the cybersecurity team early in the development lifecycle to integrate security by design principles, represents best professional practice. This aligns with the principles of data protection by design and by default, as mandated by regulations such as the UK GDPR. It ensures that security considerations are embedded from the outset, rather than being an afterthought, thereby minimizing risks and demonstrating a commitment to regulatory compliance and client trust. This proactive stance is crucial for preventing data breaches and maintaining the integrity of client data. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with development and planning to address security concerns in a later phase. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure because it violates the principle of data protection by design. It increases the likelihood of vulnerabilities being introduced into the system, which could lead to data breaches and subsequent penalties under data protection laws. Ethically, it demonstrates a disregard for client privacy and security. Another incorrect approach is to assume that existing generic security measures are sufficient without specific validation for the new project. This is a failure to conduct adequate risk assessment and due diligence, which is a cornerstone of regulatory compliance. Regulations often require specific measures tailored to the type and sensitivity of data being processed. Relying on assumptions without verification can lead to inadequate protection and non-compliance. A third incorrect approach is to prioritize speed of delivery over security requirements, with the intention of retrofitting security later. This is a direct contravention of data protection principles and best practices. It creates a high-risk environment where sensitive data is exposed during development and testing phases, potentially leading to breaches before adequate safeguards are in place. This approach demonstrates a lack of professional responsibility towards data security and client confidentiality. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach, integrating security and privacy considerations into every stage of the project lifecycle. This involves early and continuous engagement with security experts, conducting thorough data protection impact assessments, DPIA, where necessary, and ensuring that all implemented measures are proportionate to the risks identified. Decision-making should be guided by a commitment to ethical data handling and strict adherence to relevant regulatory frameworks, prioritizing the protection of sensitive information above all else. Question 3. Comparative studies suggest that the implementation of AI-driven solutions in critical business processes requires careful consideration of regulatory adherence. For a new AI-powered customer onboarding system at NTT Data, what is the most prudent approach to ensure compliance with the specific regulatory framework governing the NTT Data hiring assessment test? Option A. Prioritize the speed of deployment over detailed compliance checks, assuming that the AI system's general adherence to data privacy principles is sufficient. Option B. Rely exclusively on the AI vendor's compliance certifications and documentation, assuming their system meets all jurisdictional requirements without independent verification. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive, phased rollout of the AI system, with rigorous validation of its outputs against the exam's regulatory framework at each stage, and establish continuous monitoring mechanisms. Option D. Implement the AI system immediately to leverage its efficiency benefits, with a plan to address any compliance issues that may arise post-launch. Correct answer is D. Implement the AI system immediately to leverage its efficiency benefits, with a plan to address any compliance issues that may arise post-launch. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between rapid technological adoption and the need for robust regulatory compliance and data integrity. The implementation of a new AI-driven customer onboarding system, while promising efficiency gains, introduces complexities in ensuring that all data processed and stored adhere strictly to the NTT data hiring assessment tests specified regulatory framework. The challenge lies in balancing innovation with the non-negotiable requirements of data privacy, security, and accuracy, as mandated by the exam's jurisdiction. The correct approach, which involves a phased rollout with continuous monitoring and validation against the exam's regulatory framework, represents best professional practice because it prioritizes risk mitigation by systematically testing and verifying each stage of the AI system's integration against the specific laws and guidelines of the NTT data hiring assessment test jurisdiction. The organization ensures that compliance is built into the process, not an afterthought. This proactive stance minimizes the likelihood of regulatory breaches, data inaccuracies, or security vulnerabilities, thereby safeguarding the company's reputation and avoiding potential penalties. This approach aligns with the ethical imperative to act with due diligence and professional competence. An incorrect approach that bypasses thorough validation of the AI system's output against the exam's regulatory framework would be professionally unacceptable. This failure would constitute a direct violation of the principle of regulatory adherence, potentially leading to the processing of inaccurate or non-compliant data, which could have severe legal and financial repercussions. Another incorrect approach, such as relying solely on vendor assurances without independent verification, demonstrates a lack of professional skepticism and due diligence. This oversight could result in the deployment of a system that, despite vendor claims, does not meet the specific, stringent requirements of the NTT data hiring assessment test jurisdiction, leading to non-compliance and potential data integrity issues. Professionals facing similar situations should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with a thorough understanding of the applicable regulatory landscape. This involves identifying all relevant laws, guidelines, and internal policies. Next, a risk assessment should be conducted to pinpoint potential compliance gaps and vulnerabilities associated with the proposed implementation. The chosen solution should then be evaluated against these risks, prioritizing approaches that offer the highest degree of assurance for regulatory adherence and data integrity. Continuous monitoring and a willingness to adapt the implementation strategy based on ongoing assessments are crucial for maintaining compliance in dynamic technological environments. Question 4. The monitoring system demonstrates a significant increase in the volume of transaction data being processed, with no immediate indication of specific fraudulent activity or policy breaches. Which of the following approaches best balances operational efficiency with regulatory compliance and client confidentiality? Option A. Immediately escalate all transaction data spikes to senior management for review, regardless of specific risk indicators. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive manual review of every single transaction within the increased volume to identify any potential issues. Option C. Implement a tiered alert system that flags anomalies based on deviations from established baselines and historical patterns, triggering deeper investigation only for high-confidence alerts. Option D. Focus monitoring efforts solely on the total volume of data processed, assuming any increase signifies a potential problem requiring broad scrutiny. The correct answer is C. Implement a tiered alert system that flags anomalies based on deviations from established baselines and historical patterns, triggering deeper investigation only for high-confidence alerts. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for robust data monitoring and the imperative to protect client confidentiality and privacy, especially within the context of financial services regulations. The NTT data hiring assessment test likely evaluates an understanding of how to balance these competing demands in a practical, operational setting. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a risk-based methodology that aligns with regulatory expectations for data protection and system integrity. By focusing on anomalies and deviations from established baselines, it ensures that monitoring efforts are efficient and targeted, minimizing the risk of both false positives and missed critical events. This approach is ethically sound as it respects the privacy of individuals whose data is being monitored, while fulfilling the organization's duty to maintain secure and compliant systems. It directly addresses the spirit of regulations that require effective oversight without unnecessary intrusion. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the volume of data processed, without regard for its nature or context, fails to meet regulatory standards for data governance and risk management. Such an approach could lead to an overwhelming number of alerts, diminishing the effectiveness of the monitoring system and potentially masking genuine threats. It also risks violating privacy principles by indiscriminately flagging data that is not indicative of any risk. Another incorrect approach that involves immediate escalation of all detected data patterns, regardless of their significance or potential for false positives, is inefficient and can lead to alert fatigue. This can desensitize operational teams to genuine threats and strain resources. From a regulatory perspective, it demonstrates a lack of nuanced understanding of risk assessment and could be seen as a failure to implement proportionate controls. It also raises concerns about unnecessary disclosure of potentially sensitive information. A further incorrect approach that relies on manual review of all data points without the aid of automated anomaly detection is impractical and unsustainable for large-scale operations. This would not only be cost-prohibitive, but also highly prone to human error and oversight, failing to provide the timely and comprehensive monitoring expected by regulators. It neglects the technological advancements designed to enhance efficiency and accuracy in compliance monitoring. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough understanding of the regulatory landscape, including data protection laws and financial services specific compliance requirements. Professionals must then assess the specific risks associated with the data being monitored and the potential impact of breaches or anomalies. Implementing a tiered approach to monitoring, where automated systems identify potential issues and human oversight is applied judiciously to high-risk alerts, is a hallmark of effective risk management and regulatory adherence. This involves continuous refinement of monitoring parameters based on evolving threats and regulatory guidance. Question 5. To address the challenge of migrating sensitive client data to a new system while ensuring compliance with data protection regulations, what is the most prudent approach to identifying and mitigating potential privacy risks? Option A. Accept the system vendor's standard data security and privacy assurances without conducting an independent assessment of their suitability for the specific client data being migrated. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive data protection impact assessment (DPIA) as an integral part of the project planning and execution phases, focusing on identifying and mitigating risks before and during the migration. Option C. Postpone any formal data privacy assessment until after the system migration is fully completed and the new system is operational. Option D. Rely exclusively on the data anonymization techniques provided by the system vendor, assuming they inherently satisfy all privacy requirements. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive data protection impact assessment (DPIA) as an integral part of the project planning and execution phases, focusing on identifying and mitigating risks before and during the migration. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common implementation challenge in financial services, balancing the need for efficient data processing with the imperative to comply with stringent data protection regulations. The challenge lies in identifying and mitigating risks associated with handling sensitive client information during a system migration. A misstep can lead to significant regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and loss of client trust. The pressure to meet project deadlines can exacerbate this, potentially leading to shortcuts that compromise compliance. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a proactive and comprehensive data privacy impact assessment (DPIA) integrated into the system migration project plan. This aligns with the principles of data protection by design and by default, as mandated by regulations like the UK GDPR. A DPIA systematically identifies potential risks to individuals' rights and freedoms arising from the processing of personal data. By conducting this assessment early and iteratively, the project team can implement appropriate technical and organizational measures to mitigate identified risks before they materialize. This demonstrates a commitment to lawful and ethical data handling, ensuring that the migration process respects client privacy and adheres to regulatory requirements. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to defer the data privacy assessment until after the system migration is complete. This is a reactive stance that violates the principle of data protection by design. It means that any privacy risks inherent in the new system's architecture or data handling processes would have already been embedded, making remediation significantly more complex and costly. Furthermore, it increases the likelihood of non-compliance with data protection laws, which often require assessments to be conducted before processing begins. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on anonymization of data, without a thorough understanding of the anonymization techniques used and their effectiveness. While anonymization can reduce privacy risks, if not implemented correctly, re-identification of individuals may still be possible, especially when combined with other publicly available data. This approach fails to adequately assess the residual risks and may not meet the high standard of protection required by data protection legislation. It bypasses the detailed risk analysis that a DPIA provides. A third incorrect approach is to assume that the vendor's standard data security protocols are sufficient without independent verification and assessment within the context of the specific migration. While vendors may have robust security measures, they may not be tailored to the specific data flows, processing activities, or regulatory obligations of the client. This approach neglects the client's ultimate responsibility for data protection and fails to ensure that the chosen solution meets the specific requirements of the UK GDPR or other relevant regulations. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such implementation challenges should adopt a risk-based proactive approach. This involves 1. Early engagement of data protection expertise. Involve data protection officers or privacy specialists from the outset of the project. 2. Comprehensive risk assessment. Conduct a thorough DPIA to identify and evaluate potential privacy risks. 3. Mitigation strategy development. Design and implement appropriate technical and organizational measures to address identified risks. 4. Continuous monitoring and review. Regularly assess the effectiveness of implemented measures and adapt as necessary. 5. Documentation. Maintain detailed records of all assessments, decisions, and mitigation actions to demonstrate compliance. Question 6. The control framework reveals that the data minimization mandate requires significant modifications to the current data processing infrastructure. The project team is tasked with implementing these changes within a tight deadline, which approach best balances regulatory compliance with operational stability. Option A. A phased implementation, beginning with a pilot program on a subset of systems and data, followed by iterative rollouts based on lessons learned. Option B. Implementing the changes without comprehensive testing and validation to meet the deadline. Option C. A big bang approach, implementing all required changes simultaneously across all systems to ensure immediate compliance. Option D. Prioritizing the deadline above all else, focusing only on superficial changes to appear compliant. The correct answer is A. A phased implementation, beginning with a pilot program on a subset of systems and data, followed by iterative rollouts based on lessons learned. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common implementation challenge where a new regulatory requirement, the data minimization mandate, necessitates significant changes to an existing data processing system. The challenge lies in balancing the urgency of compliance with the potential disruption to ongoing business operations and the risk of introducing new vulnerabilities during the implementation. The project team is under pressure to deliver quickly, but a rushed implementation could lead to incomplete data removal, unintended data loss, or security breaches, all of which carry substantial regulatory and reputational risks. Careful judgment is required to ensure the implementation is both timely and robust. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a phased implementation strategy, starting with a pilot program on a subset of the data and systems. This allows the team to test the effectiveness of the data minimization controls, identify and rectify any issues in a controlled environment, and gather feedback before a full-scale rollout. This approach aligns with best professional practices by demonstrating due diligence and a commitment to regulatory compliance. Specifically, it adheres to the principles of risk management and iterative development, which are implicitly encouraged by regulatory frameworks that expect organizations to implement controls in a manner that minimizes disruption and maximizes effectiveness. This phased approach allows for continuous monitoring and adjustment, ensuring that the final implementation meets the data minimization mandate without compromising data integrity or security. Incorrect approach is analysis, a Big Bang approach where all changes are implemented simultaneously across all systems, is professionally unacceptable. This method significantly increases the risk of widespread failure, data corruption, or security incidents due to the lack of a controlled testing environment, demonstrates a disregard for robust risk management principles, and could lead to significant regulatory penalties for non-compliance or data breaches. Implementing the changes without comprehensive testing and validation is also professionally unacceptable. This bypasses critical quality assurance steps and exposes the organization to the risk of incomplete data minimization, potentially leaving sensitive data exposed and violating the spirit and letter of the data minimization mandate. It indicates a failure to uphold professional standards of care and diligence, focusing solely on meeting the deadline without adequately addressing the technical complexities and potential downstream impacts is professionally unsound. This prioritizes speed over accuracy and security, which can lead to a superficial compliance that fails to achieve the intended regulatory objective and creates a false sense of security. This approach neglects the fundamental responsibility to implement controls effectively. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured, risk-based approach to regulatory implementation. This involves 1. Understanding the full scope and implications of the new regulation. 2. Conducting a thorough impact assessment of the regulation on existing systems and processes. 3. Developing a detailed implementation plan that prioritizes risk mitigation and phased rollout. 4. Establishing clear testing and validation protocols at each stage. 5. Implementing robust monitoring and feedback mechanisms throughout the implementation lifecycle. 6. Ensuring adequate resources and expertise are allocated to the project. 7. Maintaining open communication with relevant stakeholders, including regulatory bodies if necessary. This systematic process ensures that compliance is achieved effectively, efficiently, and with minimal disruption, upholding both regulatory obligations and professional integrity. Question 7. Quality control measures reveal that a critical business intelligence report, intended to inform strategic investment decisions, was generated using a dataset that has not undergone a full validation process due to tight deadlines. The analysis team is under pressure to deliver the report immediately. What is the most appropriate course of action to ensure both timely delivery and the integrity of the findings, adhering strictly to UK regulatory expectations for financial data handling and reporting? Option A. Expedite the validation process by using automated data checks only, without manual verification, to balance speed and a degree of assurance before delivery. Option B. Deliver the report based on the unvalidated data, but immediately initiate a post-delivery validation process to correct any errors discovered later. Option C. Proceed with delivering the report as is, with a disclaimer noting the unvalidated nature of the data to meet the immediate deadline. Option D. Halt the report's delivery. Conduct a comprehensive validation of the dataset and analytical methodologies, and then deliver the validated report, even if it causes a delay. The correct answer is C. Proceed with delivering the report as is, with a disclaimer noting the unvalidated nature of the data to meet the immediate deadline. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for data analysis with the long-term implications of data integrity and regulatory compliance. The pressure to deliver results quickly can lead to shortcuts that compromise the accuracy and reliability of the findings, potentially leading to flawed business decisions and regulatory breaches. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the analytical process adheres to established quality standards and legal requirements. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach, which involves a thorough review and validation of the data sources and methodologies before proceeding with the analysis, represents best professional practice. This aligns with principles of data governance and quality assurance, which are often mandated by regulatory frameworks such as those governing financial services or data privacy. For example, in the UK, the Financial Conduct Authority, FCA, expects firms to have robust systems and controls in place to ensure the accuracy and completeness of data used for reporting and decision-making. Similarly, data protection regulations like the UK GDPR emphasize the importance of data accuracy and integrity. By validating data and methodologies, professionals ensure that the analysis is based on sound foundations, minimizing the risk of errors and misinterpretations, and upholding ethical obligations to provide accurate information. Incorrect approaches analysis. An incorrect approach that bypasses validation to expedite the analysis would be professionally unacceptable. This would violate regulatory expectations for due diligence and data integrity. For instance, under FCA regulations, a failure to adequately validate data could be considered a breach of the principles for businesses, specifically Principle 3, Management and Control, and Principle 7, Communications with Clients, if flawed data leads to misleading communications or poor management decisions. Ethically, it represents a disregard for professional responsibility to ensure the accuracy of work product. Another incorrect approach, such as relying solely on automated tools without human oversight for validation, also poses significant risks. While automation can improve efficiency, it does not absolve professionals of their responsibility to ensure the quality of the output. Regulatory bodies often require a level of human judgment and oversight, especially in critical decision-making processes. A failure to provide this oversight could be seen as a dereliction of duty, potentially leading to regulatory sanctions if errors are subsequently discovered. Finally, an approach that prioritizes speed over accuracy by using incomplete or unverified datasets would be a clear violation of data quality standards and regulatory requirements. This could lead to biased or misleading analytical outcomes, impacting business strategy, and potentially causing harm to stakeholders or clients. Such actions would be inconsistent with the ethical duty of care and the legal obligations to maintain accurate records and provide reliable information. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a situation should adopt a structured decision-making process. First, they must identify the core objective and the constraints, including time pressures and available resources. Second, they should consult relevant internal policies and external regulatory guidelines to understand the required standards for data quality and analytical rigor. Third, they should assess the risks associated with different approaches, considering potential impacts on data integrity, business decisions, and regulatory compliance. Fourth, they should prioritize approaches that uphold ethical principles and meet regulatory obligations, even if it requires more time or resources. This involves a proactive stance on quality assurance and a commitment to transparency about any limitations or assumptions made during the analytical process. Question 8. Quality control measures reveal that a critical dataset intended for a client project has a significant number of anomalies that could skew the final analysis. The project deadline is imminent, and the client is expecting the deliverables within 48 hours. The team lead suggests proceeding with the current data, assuming the anomalies are minor and will not materially affect the outcome, while privately planning to address them in a subsequent post-delivery refinement. What is the most ethically sound and professionally responsible course of action? Option A. Proceed with the project using the current data as planned by the team lead and address the anomalies in a post-delivery refinement to meet the deadline. Option B. Continue with the project using the current data and hope that the client does not identify the anomalies or their impact on the analysis. Option C. Attempt to manually correct the anomalies in the dataset without informing the client or documenting the changes, to ensure the deadline is met with seemingly accurate data. Option D. Immediately inform the client about the data anomalies, explain the potential impact, and propose a revised timeline to ensure data integrity, even if it means delaying the delivery. The correct answer is D. Immediately inform the client about the data anomalies, explain the potential impact, and propose a revised timeline to ensure data integrity, even if it means delaying the delivery. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it involves a conflict between delivering a project on time and ensuring the integrity of the data used, which directly impacts client trust and regulatory compliance. The pressure to meet deadlines can tempt individuals to overlook potential data issues, but doing so carries significant ethical and professional risks. Careful judgment is required to balance competing demands. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes data integrity and transparency, which are fundamental ethical obligations and often mandated by regulatory frameworks. By raising concerns about the data quality and proposing a solution, the professional upholds their duty to the client and the firm, ensuring that decisions are based on accurate information. This aligns with principles of professional conduct that emphasize honesty, diligence, and the avoidance of misrepresentation. An incorrect approach that involves proceeding with the project without addressing the data quality issues would be a failure to exercise due diligence. This could lead to inaccurate reporting, flawed analysis, and ultimately, poor business decisions for the client. Ethically, it constitutes a breach of trust and professional responsibility. From a regulatory standpoint, depending on the specific NTT data assessment context and any implied regulatory environment, this could violate guidelines related to data accuracy and client reporting standards. Another incorrect approach, such as attempting to fix the data without proper documentation or client consultation, is also problematic. This can be seen as an attempt to conceal the initial data quality issue, which is dishonest. It also bypasses necessary client communication and approval processes, undermining transparency and potentially leading to disputes if the fixed data is later questioned. This approach fails to adhere to principles of accountability and open communication. A third incorrect approach, which is to ignore the issue entirely and hope it goes unnoticed, is a dereliction of professional duty. It demonstrates a lack of integrity and a failure to proactively identify and mitigate risks. This passive stance can have severe consequences if the data inaccuracies are discovered later, potentially damaging the firm's reputation and leading to client dissatisfaction or even legal repercussions. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Identify the ethical or professional conflict. 2. Gather all relevant facts, including the nature and potential impact of the data quality issue. 3. Consult relevant internal policies, ethical guidelines, and any applicable regulatory frameworks. 4. Communicate concerns clearly and professionally to appropriate stakeholders, proposing potential solutions. 5. Document all actions and communications. 6. Escalate the issue if necessary to ensure it is addressed appropriately. This process emphasizes proactive problem-solving, transparency, and adherence to professional standards. Question 9. Consider a scenario where you are pitching for a new project with a prospective client. During your preparation, you realize that the new client's problem is very similar to a complex challenge you successfully resolved for a previous client. You have a wealth of specific insights and a proven methodology from that past engagement that could significantly expedite the new project and impress the prospective client. However, you are bound by confidentiality agreements with your former client. How should you proceed? Option A. Propose that the new client's problem is essentially identical to the previous one and offer to implement the same solution, assuring them of a quick and effective resolution based on your prior success. Option B. Focus on general industry best practices and publicly available information to demonstrate your expertise, without referencing or utilizing any specific details, methodologies, or outcomes from the previous client's project. Option C. Share the specific, anonymized examples and the unique methodology you developed for the previous client, explaining how it directly applies to the new client's situation to showcase your problem-solving capabilities. Option D. Discuss the general approach and strategic framework you employed for the previous client, highlighting the types of challenges faced and the broad strokes of your solution, without revealing any proprietary information. The correct answer is B. Focus on general industry best practices and publicly available information to demonstrate your expertise, without referencing or utilizing any specific details, methodologies, or outcomes from the previous client's project. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it pits the immediate desire to secure a new client against the fundamental ethical obligation of maintaining client confidentiality. The temptation to leverage past client information, even if seemingly innocuous, can lead to a breach of trust and potential legal repercussions. The professional must navigate the fine line between demonstrating expertise and respecting the proprietary nature of information gained during previous engagements. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves refraining from using any specific details or insights gained from the previous client's project. This upholds the principle of client confidentiality, a cornerstone of professional ethics and often a contractual obligation. By focusing on general industry knowledge and publicly available information, the professional demonstrates their capabilities without compromising trust or violating any agreements. This approach aligns with professional codes of conduct that mandate discretion and the protection of sensitive client data. Incorrect approaches analysis. Using specific, albeit anonymized, examples from the previous client's project, even if presented as hypothetical, constitutes a breach of confidentiality. This is because the underlying information is still derived from a privileged relationship and could inadvertently reveal details about the former client's business or strategies. This violates the ethical duty of loyalty and trust owed to past clients. Sharing the general approach or methodology used for the previous client's project, even without naming the client, can still be problematic. If this methodology is unique or proprietary to the former client, its disclosure could be considered a breach of intellectual property or a violation of confidentiality clauses. It risks providing a competitive advantage to a new client at the expense of the former one. Suggesting that the new client's problem is exactly like the previous one and offering to replicate the prior solution, even with good intentions, is ethically unsound. It implies a reliance on specific, potentially confidential past work and may not be the optimal solution for the new client's unique circumstances. This approach prioritizes expediency over a thorough, independent assessment and risks misrepresenting the applicability of past solutions. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical obligations and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Identifying potential conflicts of interest and ethical dilemmas. 2. Consulting relevant professional codes of conduct and contractual agreements. 3. Seeking to understand the specific nature of the information in question and its potential impact if disclosed. 4. Opting for approaches that are transparent, defensible, and uphold the highest standards of integrity, even if it means foregoing a perceived short-term advantage. In cases of doubt, seeking guidance from a supervisor or legal counsel is advisable. Question 10. The investigation demonstrates that a client who has recently inherited a substantial sum is adamant about investing the entire inheritance into a single, highly speculative cryptocurrency, despite having a low risk tolerance and no prior experience with digital assets. The financial advisor has conducted a thorough assessment of the client's financial situation and determined that this investment is highly unsuitable and poses a significant risk of capital loss. Option A. Inform the client that their request cannot be fulfilled and immediately terminate the professional relationship without further explanation. Option B. Execute the client's requested investment in the cryptocurrency immediately to avoid upsetting the client and potentially losing their business. Option C. Advise the client that the proposed investment is not suitable based on their risk tolerance and financial goals, and present alternative investment strategies that align with their stated objectives, while clearly explaining the risks and potential downsides of the cryptocurrency. Option D. Suggest a portfolio of other high-risk, speculative investments that are more familiar to the advisor, even if they are also not ideal for the client's risk profile. The correct answer is C. Advise the client that the proposed investment is not suitable based on their risk tolerance and financial goals, and present alternative investment strategies that align with their stated objectives, while clearly explaining the risks and potential downsides of the cryptocurrency. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a conflict between a client's explicit request and the professional's ethical obligation to act in the client's best interest, even if it means disagreeing with the client's stated preference. The challenge lies in balancing client autonomy with the duty of care and fiduciary responsibility. The professional must navigate potential reputational damage, client dissatisfaction, and the risk of regulatory scrutiny if they proceed with a recommendation that is not demonstrably in the client's long-term benefit. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough, objective assessment of the client's financial situation, risk tolerance, and long-term goals, independent of the client's initial, potentially ill-informed request. This aligns with the fundamental ethical principles of acting with integrity, skill, care, and diligence, and always in the client's best interest. Specifically, it upholds the duty to provide suitable advice, which requires understanding the client's circumstances and recommending products or strategies that are appropriate for them. This approach prioritizes the client's welfare over immediate gratification or a potentially detrimental short-term decision, reflecting best professional practice as mandated by regulatory frameworks that emphasize client protection and suitability. Incorrect approaches analysis. Proceeding with the client's request without further due diligence would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It would breach the duty to provide suitable advice, potentially exposing the client to undue risk or unsuitable investments. This could lead to regulatory sanctions for failing to adhere to client suitability rules and a breach of professional conduct standards. Suggesting alternative, less suitable products to appease the client, while appearing to offer options, would still be ethically compromised if those alternatives are not genuinely in the client's best interest. This approach attempts to circumvent the core issue of suitability and could be seen as a form of misrepresentation or a failure to act with integrity. Escalating the situation to a supervisor without first attempting to understand and address the client's concerns directly, or without a clear indication of a significant ethical breach that requires immediate supervisory intervention, might be seen as an abdication of professional responsibility. While escalation is sometimes necessary, it should follow a reasoned attempt to resolve the issue at the professional level, demonstrating a commitment to client engagement and problem solving. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with a clear understanding of the client's needs and objectives. This involves active listening, comprehensive data gathering, and objective analysis. When a client's request conflicts with professional judgment, the process should involve transparent communication with the client, explaining the rationale behind the professional's recommendation and the potential risks associated with the client's preferred course of action. The professional should then present well-reasoned alternatives that align with the client's best interests. If, after thorough discussion and explanation, the client insists on a course of action that the professional deems unsuitable and potentially harmful, the professional must consider their ethical obligations, which may include refusing to proceed with the transaction or seeking guidance from their compliance department or supervisor. Question 11. Upon reviewing a client's request to implement a specific data processing strategy that appears to deviate from standard best practices and potentially raises concerns about data privacy and security under the NTT Data Hiring Assessment Test's operational guidelines, what is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Immediately implement the client's requested data processing strategy to ensure client satisfaction and avoid any perception of resistance. Option B. Engage in a detailed discussion with the client to understand the rationale behind their request, clearly explain the potential risks and regulatory implications, and propose alternative compliance strategies that still aim to meet their underlying objectives. Option C. Proceed with the client's requested strategy but make minor, superficial modifications to create the appearance of compliance without a thorough risk assessment or client consultation. Option D. Politely decline the client's request, stating that it falls outside the firm's acceptable operational parameters without further explanation or exploration of alternatives. Correct answer is B. Engage in a detailed discussion with the client to understand the rationale behind their request, clearly explain the potential risks and regulatory implications, and propose alternative compliance strategies that still aim to meet their underlying objectives. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the conflict between a client's explicit, albeit potentially ill-advised, request and the professional's duty to act in the client's best interest and uphold regulatory standards. The challenge lies in navigating the gray area, where a client's instructions might lead to a suboptimal or even detrimental outcome, potentially exposing both the client and the firm to regulatory scrutiny or reputational damage. The professional must balance client autonomy with their fiduciary responsibilities and adherence to the NTT Data Hiring Assessment Test's governing framework. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough, documented discussion with the client to understand the rationale behind their request and to clearly articulate the potential risks and alternative, more compliant strategies. This aligns with the ethical principles of client care, transparency, and professional integrity, as well as any implied regulatory requirements within the NTT Data Hiring Assessment Test framework that emphasize due diligence and client suitability. By seeking to understand the client's objectives and educating them on the implications of their request, the professional demonstrates a commitment to acting in the client's best long-term interest, even if it means advising against their initial instruction. This approach also proactively mitigates potential future issues by ensuring the client is fully informed. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately fulfilling the client's request without further inquiry. This fails to meet the professional's duty of care and due diligence. It could lead to a breach of internal policies or regulatory guidelines if the request, when executed, results in an unsuitable or non-compliant outcome. This approach prioritizes client instruction over professional judgment and ethical responsibility. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the client's request outright without attempting to understand their underlying needs or concerns. This demonstrates a lack of client engagement and could damage the professional relationship. While the request might be problematic, a complete refusal without exploration might overlook a legitimate underlying objective that could be met through an alternative, compliant method. This approach can be seen as unhelpful and potentially dismissive of the client's perspective. A third incorrect approach is to proceed with the request while making minor, superficial adjustments without a substantive discussion about the risks. This is a form of going through the motions and does not constitute genuine due diligence. It risks creating a false sense of compliance while still exposing the client and the firm to potential negative consequences. This approach lacks transparency and a commitment to truly serving the client's best interests. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured decision-making process when faced with client requests that raise ethical or regulatory concerns. This process typically involves 1. Active listening and information gathering. Understand the client's request and their underlying motivations. 2. Risk assessment. Evaluate the potential ethical, regulatory, and business risks associated with the request. 3. Professional judgment and advice. Formulate a professional opinion based on expertise, ethical principles, and applicable regulations. 4. Transparent communication. Clearly explain the risks and benefits of different courses of action to the client, offering compliant alternatives. 5. Documentation. Record all discussions, advice given, and decisions made. 6. Escalation if necessary. If a resolution cannot be reached or if the situation involves significant risk, escalate to a supervisor or compliance department. Question 12. Operational review demonstrates that a key client has requested a specific data handling procedure that, while seemingly efficient, appears to contravene a core principle of data privacy outlined in the NTT Data Hiring Assessment Tests regulatory framework. The client is insistent, citing competitive pressures and a desire for speed. Option A. Implement the client's requested procedure, assuming the client understands and accepts any potential risks, to maintain the client relationship and meet their immediate needs. Option B. Explain the regulatory concerns to the client, detailing the specific data privacy principle that would be violated, and propose alternative compliant methods to achieve their objective of speed and efficiency. Option C. Subtly modify the client's requested procedure to appear compliant on the surface, without explicitly informing the client of the original request's non-compliance. Option D. Decline the client's request without further explanation, focusing solely on avoiding any potential breach of the regulatory framework. The correct answer is B. Explain the regulatory concerns to the client, detailing the specific data privacy principle that would be violated, and propose alternative compliant methods to achieve their objective of speed and efficiency. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the conflict between a client's explicit request and the potential for that request to lead to a regulatory breach or unethical practice. The pressure to maintain a client relationship and secure future business can create a temptation to overlook or downplay risks. Careful judgment is required to balance client satisfaction with professional integrity and adherence to regulatory obligations. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves clearly communicating the regulatory limitations and ethical concerns to the client. This demonstrates a commitment to professional standards and client well-being by preventing them from inadvertently engaging in non-compliant activities. It upholds the principle of acting with integrity and in the best interests of both the client and the regulatory framework. By offering alternative compliant solutions, the professional maintains a constructive client relationship while ensuring adherence to the NTT data hiring assessment tests specified regulatory framework. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with the client's request without question. This would constitute a failure to uphold professional responsibility and could lead to a direct violation of the NTT data hiring assessment tests regulatory framework. It demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for potential compliance issues, exposing both the professional and the client to significant risks, including reputational damage and potential penalties. Another incorrect approach is to subtly alter the client's request to make it appear compliant, without full disclosure. This is a form of deception and undermines transparency. It fails to address the underlying ethical concern and could still lead to unintended regulatory breaches if the spirit of the original request is maintained. This approach erodes trust and is contrary to the principles of ethical conduct expected within the NTT data hiring assessment tests operational guidelines. Third incorrect approach is to refuse the client's request outright without offering any explanation or alternative solutions. While it avoids direct noncompliance, it is unprofessional and can damage the client relationship unnecessarily. It misses an opportunity to educate the client and demonstrate value by finding compliant ways to meet their underlying needs. This approach lacks the proactive and client-centric problem-solving expected in a professional setting. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a framework that prioritizes understanding the client's underlying objective, assessing it against the relevant regulatory and ethical guidelines, and then proactively proposing compliant and ethical solutions. This involves open communication, a willingness to educate the client on limitations, and a commitment to finding mutually beneficial outcomes that do not compromise integrity or compliance. Question 13. Examination of the data shows a client has requested a specific investment strategy that, while potentially offering short-term gains, carries significant regulatory risks and is not aligned with their stated long-term financial goals or risk tolerance. The professional has identified alternative strategies that are compliant, suitable, and better aligned with the client's objectives. Option A. Discuss the regulatory risks and potential negative consequences of the requested strategy with the client. Explain why it is not suitable, and propose the alternative compliant strategies that better align with their stated goals and risk tolerance. Option B. Execute the client's requested investment strategy immediately to ensure client satisfaction and avoid potential disputes. Option C. Inform the client that their request cannot be fulfilled and cease further engagement without offering any alternative solutions. Option D. Proceed with the client's requested strategy, but include a disclaimer acknowledging the risks, without further discussion or alternative proposals. The correct answer is A. Discuss the regulatory risks and potential negative consequences of the requested strategy with the client. Explain why it is not suitable, and propose the alternative compliant strategies that better align with their stated goals and risk tolerance. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's explicit request and the ethical obligation to act in their best interest. Guided by regulatory principles, the professional must navigate the potential for reputational damage, client dissatisfaction, and regulatory scrutiny. The core of the dilemma lies in balancing client autonomy with the duty of care and adherence to professional standards. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes the client's long-term well-being and regulatory compliance over immediate client satisfaction or a potentially harmful shortcut. This involves open communication, education, and offering alternative compliant solutions. This aligns with the principles of acting with integrity, competence, and in the best interests of the client, as mandated by professional codes of conduct and regulatory frameworks. Specifically, it upholds the duty to provide suitable advice and to avoid actions that could lead to regulatory breaches or harm to the client. An incorrect approach that involves directly fulfilling the client's request without further inquiry or guidance would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the potential negative consequences for the client, which could include financial loss, regulatory penalties, or reputational damage. Breaches the duty of care and competence by not adequately assessing the suitability of the requested action. Another incorrect approach, such as refusing to engage with the client's request at all, demonstrates a lack of client service and an unwillingness to explore compliant alternatives, potentially damaging the professional relationship and failing to uphold the duty to assist the client within ethical and regulatory boundaries. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the client's objectives and concerns. This is followed by an assessment of the request against relevant regulations, ethical guidelines, and professional best practices. If the request conflicts with these standards, the professional should clearly communicate the concerns to the client, explain the rationale behind the professional's position, and proactively offer compliant and suitable alternatives that still aim to meet the client's underlying needs. This iterative process of communication, assessment, and solution finding is crucial for ethical and effective professional practice. Question 14. Performance analysis shows a consistent dip in transaction processing times during peak hours, leading to increased customer complaints. While a preliminary review suggests that increasing server capacity might resolve this, what is the most prudent next step to ensure effective and compliant process optimization? Option A. Conduct a detailed root cause analysis of the transaction processing bottlenecks, examining system logs, user workflow, and potential external dependencies before proposing any changes. Option B. Focus on retraining staff on efficient transaction handling procedures, assuming user error is the primary cause of delays. Option C. Implement a temporary measure to defer non-critical transactions to off-peak hours to reduce the immediate load. Option D. Immediately approve the purchase of additional server capacity to alleviate the immediate pressure and improve processing times. The correct answer is A. Conduct a detailed root cause analysis of the transaction processing bottlenecks, examining system logs, user workflows, and potential external dependencies before proposing any changes. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in process optimization, where initial data suggests a potential improvement, but a deeper understanding of the underlying causes and potential unintended consequences is crucial. The professional challenge lies in moving beyond superficial metrics to identify the root cause of performance dips and to implement solutions that are sustainable and compliant with regulatory expectations. A hasty decision based solely on the presented performance analysis could lead to ineffective changes or even regulatory breaches. The correct approach involves a comprehensive root cause analysis that considers all contributing factors, including potential system limitations, user training gaps, or external dependencies, before proposing any optimization. This aligns with best professional practice by ensuring that solutions are data-driven, targeted, and address the actual problem. It also implicitly adheres to regulatory principles of due diligence and responsible operational management, ensuring that changes do not inadvertently compromise data integrity, security, or client service levels, which are often subject to regulatory oversight. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate cost reduction without understanding the impact on service quality would be professionally unacceptable. This could lead to regulatory issues if service-level agreements, SLAs, are breached or if customer complaints escalate, potentially triggering investigations into operational failures. Another incorrect approach, such as implementing a quick fix without proper testing or stakeholder consultation, risks introducing new inefficiencies or errors, which could also have regulatory implications if it affects compliance reporting or client data. A third incorrect approach, ignoring the potential impact on employee morale or workload, could lead to decreased productivity and increased errors, indirectly impacting regulatory compliance and operational effectiveness. The professional decision-making process should involve 1. Acknowledging the performance data but resisting immediate action. 2. Initiating a thorough investigation to identify the root cause, involving relevant stakeholders and data sources. 3. Evaluating potential solutions based on their effectiveness, feasibility, cost, and impact on compliance and service quality. 4. Piloting and testing proposed changes before full implementation. 5. Monitoring the impact of implemented changes and iterating as necessary. Question 15. Governance review demonstrates that the current candidate onboarding process, while thorough, is time-consuming and resource-intensive. To streamline operations and reduce costs, a proposal has been made to automate several key steps, including initial document verification and preliminary skill assessment, by integrating a new software solution. However, concerns have been raised about the potential impact on data accuracy and the candidate experience if the automation is not perfectly implemented. Which of the following approaches best balances the need for process optimization with the imperative to maintain integrity and compliance? Option A. Prioritize the cost reduction aspect of the proposal, implementing only the most straightforward automation features that offer the quickest return on investment, even if some manual steps remain. Option B. Implement the new software solution across all onboarding functions immediately to realize cost savings and efficiency gains as quickly as possible. Option C. Automate all aspects of the onboarding process, including final decision-making, to maximize efficiency and eliminate human error. Option D. Conduct a phased rollout of the new software, starting with a pilot program for a small group of candidates, followed by iterative improvements based on feedback and performance metrics before full deployment. Correct answer is B. Implement the new software solution across all onboarding functions immediately to realize cost savings and efficiency gains as quickly as possible. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in process optimization, where a seemingly efficient solution, driven by a desire for speed and cost reduction, might inadvertently introduce risks or bypass established controls. A professional challenge lies in balancing the pursuit of efficiency with the imperative to maintain compliance, data integrity, and stakeholder trust, especially within a regulated environment like that implied by a hiring assessment test. The pressure to deliver results quickly can lead to overlooking potential downstream consequences. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a phased implementation with rigorous testing and validation at each stage. This aligns with best professional practices in process optimization by ensuring that changes are controlled, measurable, and do not negatively impact critical business functions or regulatory adherence. Specifically, it embodies the principle of fail fast, learn faster in a controlled manner. This approach minimizes the risk of widespread disruption and allows for course correction before significant resources are committed or compliance is jeopardized. It also facilitates clear documentation and audit trails, which are crucial for regulatory scrutiny and internal governance. Incorrect approach is analysis. Implementing the new process directly without pilot testing or phased rollout represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It demonstrates a disregard for risk management principles and could lead to data breaches, operational failures, or noncompliance with data handling regulations, e.g., GDPR if applicable, or similar data privacy laws relevant to the assessment context. This approach prioritizes speed over safety and integrity. Automating the entire process without human oversight or validation, even if it appears more efficient, is also a failure. It assumes the automated system is infallible and fails to account for edge cases, system errors, or the need for human judgment in complex situations. This can lead to incorrect outcomes, unfair assessments, and potential legal challenges, violating ethical obligations to ensure fairness and accuracy. Focusing solely on cost reduction without considering the impact on process quality or compliance is another failure. While cost efficiency is a valid objective, it cannot come at the expense of regulatory requirements or the integrity of the assessment process. This approach demonstrates a narrow focus that neglects broader responsibilities and could lead to reputational damage and regulatory penalties. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach process optimization with a structured methodology that prioritizes risk assessment and mitigation. This involves understanding the current state, defining clear objectives, identifying potential risks and their impact, designing solutions that address these risks, and implementing changes in a controlled, iterative manner. Continuous monitoring and evaluation are essential to ensure ongoing effectiveness and compliance. A key decision-making framework involves asking, does this change enhance efficiency without compromising integrity, compliance, or fairness? Question 16. Analysis of potential process optimizations for the NTT data hiring assessment test, focusing on streamlining candidate feedback delivery, requires a careful balance between speed and thoroughness. Which of the following approaches best aligns with professional best practices for process optimization within a regulated assessment environment? Option A. Introducing a new feedback mechanism that significantly reduces the detail provided to candidates, arguing that brevity is a form of efficiency and that candidates will appreciate a quicker, albeit less informative, summary. Option B. Relying on informal suggestions from a few hiring managers to modify the existing feedback template, assuming these changes will improve efficiency without formal testing. Option C. Implementing a new automated feedback generation system immediately after a brief review of its features, prioritizing rapid deployment to reduce turnaround time for candidates. Option D. Conducting a pilot program of a revised feedback process with a small, representative group of candidates, collecting detailed feedback on clarity, fairness, and timeliness, and analyzing the results before a full rollout. The correct answer is C. Implementing a new automated feedback generation system immediately after a brief review of its features, prioritizing rapid deployment to reduce turnaround time for candidates. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in process optimization, where efficiency gains must be balanced against regulatory compliance and data integrity. The professional challenge lies in identifying improvements that are not only cost-effective, but also adhere strictly to the NTT data hiring assessment tests, implicit requirements for fairness, accuracy, and data security. A hasty implementation of a new process without thorough validation could lead to biased outcomes or data breaches, both of which carry significant reputational and operational risks. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a systematic, data-driven, and compliant methodology by focusing on identifying bottlenecks through observation and stakeholder feedback, and then proposing solutions that are tested in a controlled environment before full deployment. It ensures that any optimization is robust and does not compromise the integrity of the assessment process. This aligns with ethical principles of fairness and accuracy in evaluation, and implicitly with data protection guidelines by ensuring changes are managed responsibly. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on speed and cost reduction, without considering the impact on assessment validity or data security, is professionally unacceptable. Such an approach risks introducing bias into candidate evaluations, which is a direct ethical failure and potentially a violation of assessment standards designed to ensure equal opportunity. Another incorrect approach that bypasses validation steps to implement changes immediately, without testing, could lead to unforeseen errors or system vulnerabilities, posing a risk to data integrity and potentially violating data handling protocols. A third incorrect approach that involves implementing changes based on anecdotal evidence rather than objective analysis fails to establish a defensible rationale for the optimization, making it difficult to justify the changes and potentially leading to inconsistent application of assessment criteria. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the objectives of process optimization, followed by a thorough analysis of the current state, identification of potential improvements, rigorous testing and validation of proposed changes, and finally, controlled implementation with ongoing monitoring. This iterative and evidence-based approach ensures that optimizations are effective, compliant, and ethically sound. Question 17. System analysis indicates a potential for significant time savings in the initial candidate screening phase of the NTT data hiring assessment test by implementing a new automated tool. However, concerns have been raised about whether this tool's algorithms and data handling practices fully align with the specific regulatory framework governing the assessment. Which of the following actions best represents a responsible and compliant approach to process optimization in this context? Option A. Immediately deploy the automated screening tool to realize the projected time savings, assuming it meets general industry best practices for candidate assessment. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive review of the automated screening tool's functionality, data processing, and output against the explicit requirements and guidelines of the NTT data hiring assessment tests regulatory framework before any deployment. Option C. Rely on the vendor's assurance that the automated screening tool is compliant with all relevant data protection and hiring regulations, without independent verification against the NTT data hiring assessment test-specific framework. Option D. Proceed with a pilot deployment of the automated screening tool on a small, non-critical subset of candidates to gauge its performance, with the intention of addressing any compliance issues post-implementation. The correct answer is A. Immediately deploy the automated screening tool to realize the projected time savings, assuming it meets general industry best practices for candidate assessment. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in process optimization, where the perceived efficiency of a new system clashes with established regulatory compliance requirements. The professional challenge lies in balancing the drive for operational improvement with the non-negotiable mandate of adhering to the NTT data hiring assessment tests specific regulatory framework, which prioritizes data integrity and candidate privacy. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the core of process optimization within a regulated environment, ensuring that any proposed changes do not compromise existing compliance obligations. By initiating a thorough review of the proposed automated screening tool against the specific guidelines of the NTT data hiring assessment test, the team demonstrates a commitment to regulatory adherence. This proactive step ensures that the optimization effort is not only about speed or cost, but also about maintaining the integrity and fairness of the hiring process as mandated by the assessment's framework. This aligns with ethical principles of fairness and transparency in recruitment. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the speed of candidate processing without verifying compliance would represent a significant regulatory failure. It would violate the implicit or explicit requirements of the NTT data hiring assessment tests framework that likely govern data handling, fairness, and non-discrimination. Such an approach could lead to the disqualification of suitable candidates based on criteria not permitted by the assessment's guidelines, or worse, the mishandling of sensitive candidate data, which could have legal and reputational consequences. Another incorrect approach, which involves implementing the tool without any validation, ignores the fundamental principle of due diligence required in regulated environments. This oversight could lead to unforeseen issues that undermine the assessment's objectives and potentially breach compliance. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Understand the objective. Clearly define the process optimization goal, e.g., faster screening. 2. Identify constraints. Recognize all applicable regulatory, legal, and ethical constraints specific to the NTT data hiring assessment test. 3. Evaluate options against constraints. For each proposed optimization, rigorously assess its compatibility with these constraints. 4. Prioritize compliance. Ensure that no optimization effort jeopardizes regulatory adherence. 5. Document and validate. Maintain clear records of the evaluation process and validate any implemented changes against compliance requirements. 6. Seek expert advice. If there is any ambiguity regarding regulatory interpretation, consult with compliance officers or legal counsel. Question 18. Market research demonstrates that streamlining candidate assessment workflows can significantly reduce operational costs. Considering the NTT data hiring assessment test's emphasis on rigorous evaluation and data integrity, which of the following strategies best balances efficiency with the need for accuracy and compliance? Option A. Implement a phased approach to process optimization, starting with detailed mapping of current workflows, identifying specific bottlenecks through objective data analysis, and proposing targeted, incremental improvements with robust validation checks at each stage. Option B. Introduce automated data entry without comprehensive manual oversight, assuming that the automation software will inherently prevent errors and ensure data integrity. Option C. Accelerate the assessment process by reducing the number of validation steps for candidate data, prioritizing speed to reduce turnaround time for hiring decisions. Option D. Rely on the subjective experience of senior assessors to identify areas for improvement, making changes based on their intuition about where the process can be made faster. The correct answer is A. Implement a phased approach to process optimization, starting with detailed mapping of current workflows, identifying specific bottlenecks through objective data analysis, and proposing targeted, incremental improvements with robust validation checks at each stage. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in process optimization, where efficiency gains must be balanced against regulatory compliance and client trust. The professional challenge lies in identifying and implementing improvements that do not inadvertently compromise data integrity, client confidentiality, or adherence to the strict operational guidelines mandated by the NTT data hiring assessment test framework. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any proposed optimization aligns with the overarching goals of accuracy, security, and fairness in the assessment process. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough, data-driven understanding of the existing process before introducing changes. This involves detailed mapping of current workflows, identifying bottlenecks through objective metrics, and then proposing targeted, incremental improvements. This methodology ensures that changes are well understood, their impact can be measured, and any potential risks are mitigated. From a regulatory and ethical standpoint, this systematic approach upholds the principles of due diligence and responsible innovation, ensuring that the assessment process remains robust, fair, and compliant with any implicit or explicit NTT data guidelines regarding assessment integrity. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on speed without considering the implications for data validation would be professionally unacceptable. This would represent a failure to adhere to the implicit requirement of maintaining data accuracy and reliability, which is fundamental to any assessment process. Such an approach could lead to errors in candidate evaluation, potentially resulting in unfair outcomes and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach that involves bypassing established quality assurance checks to accelerate processing would violate ethical principles of thoroughness and accountability. This bypass could introduce undetected flaws, compromising the validity of the assessment results, and potentially leading to breaches of confidentiality or security if not properly managed. A third incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or personal intuition rather than objective data to drive optimization would be professionally unsound. This lacks the rigor required for process improvement in a regulated environment and could lead to changes that are ineffective or even detrimental, failing to meet the standards of evidence-based decision-making expected in professional settings. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, clearly define the objectives of the optimization, e.g., efficiency, accuracy, cost reduction. Second, conduct a comprehensive analysis of the current state, gathering both quantitative and qualitative data. Third, identify potential solutions, evaluating each based on its feasibility, impact, and alignment with regulatory and ethical standards. Fourth, pilot test proposed changes in a controlled environment to assess their effectiveness and identify any unintended consequences. Finally, implement changes incrementally, with continuous monitoring and evaluation to ensure ongoing success and compliance. Question 19. Research into optimizing the candidate screening process for the NTT data hiring assessment test has identified a potential shortcut that could significantly reduce the time taken to review applications. This shortcut involves automating the initial filtering based on keywords, bypassing a manual review step that is currently mandated by internal policy to ensure a holistic assessment of candidate suitability and adherence to specific assessment criteria. What is the most appropriate course of action to take regarding this potential shortcut? Option A. Proceed with the shortcut, assuming that keyword automation inherently aligns with all assessment objectives and regulatory requirements. Option B. Conduct a thorough review of the existing manual process to understand its regulatory and ethical underpinnings, assess the risks and benefits of the proposed shortcut, and consult with compliance and legal teams before considering any implementation, potentially through a controlled pilot. Option C. Implement the shortcut immediately to improve efficiency, as the primary goal is to streamline the hiring process. Option D. Suggest the shortcut to the assessment administrators without further investigation, trusting their judgment to implement it if deemed appropriate. The correct answer is C. Implement the shortcut immediately to improve efficiency, as the primary goal is to streamline the hiring process. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in process optimization, where the immediate perceived benefit of a shortcut clashes with the established, albeit slower, regulatory compliance procedures. The professional challenge lies in balancing efficiency gains with the absolute necessity of adhering to the NTT data hiring assessment test's specific regulatory framework. The chosen jurisdiction for this assessment is assumed to be one that prioritizes data integrity and client confidentiality within its hiring processes, aligning with typical industry standards for a company like NTT Data. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough, documented, and compliant review of the existing process before proposing any changes. This aligns with the principles of good governance and risk management, ensuring that any optimization does not inadvertently introduce vulnerabilities or breaches of regulatory requirements. Specifically, it demonstrates a commitment to understanding the why behind current procedures, which are often in place due to regulatory mandates or to mitigate specific risks. By involving relevant stakeholders and conducting a pilot, it ensures that proposed changes are not only efficient, but also robust and compliant. This methodical approach minimizes the risk of regulatory noncompliance, reputational damage, and potential legal repercussions, all of which are critical considerations in a regulated environment. An incorrect approach that bypasses the established review and approval process, even with the intention of improving efficiency, represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Such an approach disregards the established controls designed to ensure compliance with the NTT data, hiring assessment tests, specific guidelines. It creates a risk of introducing unintended consequences, such as data privacy violations or discriminatory practices, which could lead to severe penalties. Furthermore, it undermines the integrity of the hiring process and the trust placed in the organization by candidates and regulatory bodies. Another incorrect approach that focuses solely on speed without considering the impact on data security or candidate experience would also be a failure. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of the holistic requirements of a compliant and ethical hiring process. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Understand the objective. Clearly define the goal of the process optimization. 2. Identify constraints. Recognize all applicable regulatory, legal, and ethical constraints as well as internal policies. 3. Assess current state. Thoroughly analyze the existing process, understanding its purpose and compliance mechanisms. 4. Propose solutions. Develop potential optimization strategies, ensuring each addresses the objective while respecting constraints. 5. Evaluate risks and benefits. Quantify the potential benefits and risks of each proposed solution with a strong emphasis on compliance risks. 6. Seek stakeholder input. Consult with relevant parties, including legal, compliance, and operational teams. 7. Pilot and test. Implement changes on a small scale to validate effectiveness and compliance before full rollout. 8. Document and review. Maintain comprehensive documentation of the process, changes, and compliance checks. Question 20. The performance metrics show a consistent trend of increasing operational costs associated with delivering a specific suite of services to key clients. To address this, the leadership team is considering several strategies to improve profitability. Which of the following approaches best balances financial prudence with professional responsibility and client commitment? Option A. Proactively engage with affected clients to discuss the cost pressure, present potential service adjustments, and collaboratively explore mutually agreeable solutions that maintain service value. Option B. Immediately begin the process of terminating contracts with clients whose service delivery costs have become disproportionately high. Option C. Initiate immediate, unilateral adjustments to service delivery parameters to reduce resource allocation without prior client notification. Option D. Systematically reduce the scope and quality of services provided, while subtly downplaying the impact to clients in all communications. The correct answer is C. Initiate immediate, unilateral adjustments to service delivery parameters to reduce resource allocation, without prior client notification. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for cost reduction with the long-term implications for client relationships and regulatory compliance. The NTT Data Hiring Assessment Test. In its assumed jurisdiction, let's assume for this exercise it's a general professional services context governed by principles of good business practice and potentially implied contractual obligations, rather than a specific, named jurisdiction with detailed regulations, emphasizes ethical conduct and client centricity. The correct approach, which involves transparent communication with clients about potential service adjustments and exploring mutually agreeable solutions, represents best professional practice. This aligns with ethical principles of honesty and integrity, fostering trust and long-term partnerships. It also implicitly acknowledges any service-level agreements or implied understandings that might exist, avoiding potential breaches of contract or reputational damage. Proactively engaging clients demonstrates a commitment to their success and a willingness to collaborate, which is crucial in professional services. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate cost savings by unilaterally reducing service levels without client consultation is professionally unacceptable. This would likely constitute a breach of implied or explicit contractual terms, leading to client dissatisfaction, potential legal disputes, and severe damage to NTT Data's reputation. Such an action demonstrates a lack of respect for the client's business and a failure to uphold professional standards of service delivery. Another incorrect approach, such as attempting to mask the service reduction or downplay its impact, is ethically flawed. This involves deception and misrepresentation, eroding client trust and violating principles of transparency. It creates a false impression of service quality, which is unsustainable and ultimately harmful to both the client and NTT Data. A further incorrect approach, like immediately terminating contracts to avoid the perceived cost burden, is also professionally unsound. While contract termination is a possibility, doing so without exploring alternatives or attempting to find a mutually beneficial path forward is a reactive and potentially damaging strategy. It signals an unwillingness to adapt and collaborate, which is detrimental to building enduring business relationships. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a thorough assessment of the performance metrics, an understanding of the contractual and ethical obligations to clients, and a proactive engagement strategy. This includes exploring all viable options for cost management that do not compromise service quality or client relationships, and communicating openly and honestly with stakeholders. The focus should always be on finding solutions that preserve trust and deliver value.